Good evening. It's Southern Belle Humanism, and we're back on a stormy night. It's lightning here, so if you see some flashes in my window, that's what that is. And of course, we're in Alabama, and I'm talking tonight to Miguel Conner from Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. And he also has a YouTube channel, a blog. His website is thegodabovegod.com, and that's Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. So, and Miguel he's kind of a Renaissance man of sorts. I call him a mystic. He's a theologian. He is a philosopher, decent human being. He's an author. I've known about his podcast for a few years now. And so he's someone that I'm really excited to be speaking with right now. So welcome.
Well, thanks for having me on, and great introduction, but just like you, I'm just like everybody else, trying to spread a little bit of light.
And I'm really interested in the whole concept about Gnosticism, because I know a lot of people, they don't really know what that is. And I'm starting this whole spirituality thing here on Southern Belle Humanism, because when I made the channel, I sort of did it to demystify, like, secularism, atheism. And then I got to thinking, well, there are other sorts of spiritualities out there that also need to be sort of demystified and maybe, given a platform so people actually know what they are. So explain to everyone out there that probably doesn't know, what is Gnosticism exactly?
It's a smokers club. No, just kidding. Since I am smoking, Gnosticism historically, you might say, is an ancient heresy. It's a sort of alternative Christianity that sprung about, probably it's still up for debate at the time when Christendom came about, but it was slightly different, very different than Christianity. And as Christianity became more, I guess you might say, commercialized or serialized, the Gnostics posed a great threat and were basically stamped out of history. And this has happened all throughout history, and we can get into that. But the Gnostics posited, you might say, a very radical approach to spirituality. And it's still very radical. It's been very radical to all faiths. The Gnostics were persecuted by the Buddhists, Hindus, Christians, pagans. And you might be saying, well, God, these guys are jerks. But they weren't jerks. They were always beloved by their communities. It was always the institutions and the government that they found as a threat. And they had these, I guess I would call these points that separated them. They believed that this world was false, that we lived in an illusionary prison. Sometimes some might say a nightmarish hologram, or just a very beautiful mirage that kept us down. And most human beings were asleep. We had no idea that part of us, which they call the divine spark, really belonged beyond the stars. Mm-hmm. And that through the, you might say, then through the touching or the voice of what they called a revealer, a Gnostic revealer, we could suddenly wake up and see that this universe, that our realities were controlled by powers and principalities, by higher, called gnosis from the Greek for knowledge. And it was a special type of intuitive knowledge of our own true essence and the reality of the world. And once we had awoken, and the Gnostic revealers were various. Jesus, they considered a Gnostic revealer, and they had others. They used many characters from the Bible as their Gnostic revealers, and sometimes it would turn it inside out, like Judas. That's why we have, if maybe some of your listeners have heard of the Gospel of Judas, they saw him as sort of an anti-hero they enjoyed. Mary Magdalene, they looked up to her, and she was, in fact, a leader, and she appears in many of their Gospels, including the Gospel of Mary. So once awakened, it was a key of, through certain rituals, or through certain rituals, to be able to take these, you might say, flights into realities of consciousness and inner journeys. Also, what separates the Gnostics is that they were visionaries. When you read their writings, they're taking these amazing journeys, almost sci-fi Star Trek journeys to different dimensions. These were malevolent, and they called them the archons. Some were more positive, and they called them the Aeons. And
Aeons.
through this ritually, a human being becomes awakened. Your consciousness expands until you start to commune with this being they call the Aeons, which the Gnostics really just saw as the intelligence. When you read the Gnostic Gospels, who they call more like therapy manual, because it is this intelligence where all the flowing well, and every good thought and everything imagined is flowing, and the mind of the human being talks about in the epistles.
You're kind of breaking up a little bit. Miguel, you're kind of breaking up a little bit.
We can enter become God. Are we?
Okay. You're clear now. Yeah.
Right. Must be the weather.
So,
is there anything you want me to repeat?
What is the name of the main deity that you mentioned? The being, that everything comes from the being, all good thoughts, and what do you call that? Obviously, it's not Yahweh.
See, Yahweh, they considered, they had a term for these lesser gods, or these gods that created matter, and they called them the demiurge. And the demiurge they associated with Yahweh or some of the other gods. The ultimate god had various names, but again, they would call him the alien god. Some called him depth and silence. This male-female counterpart was that was the font of existence, the void that you might see in Buddhism. Okay. Yes, and so they had different names.
One thing that I when I was studying theology, for the first year of college, I was a philosophy major. So I did study Gnosticism, but one thing that sticks out is Sophia. And from the Gnostic scriptures, perfect mind, thunder, perfect mind.
Thunder the perfect mind, yeah.
Yes.
Thunder the perfect mind.
Can you just explain that? Because I find it really interesting that this, and you said it's a form of heresy, but it's also a form of Christianity. So can you explain to people what that is, that whole divine feminine within that?
Yeah, well, that was obviously became a threat to orthodoxy, was the fact that the Gnostics did posit more of a higher echelon to females and the female principle. It always changed, but in the Gnostic myths, which are basically, they used them as allegories to explain existentialist truths. I don't think the Gnostics ever took anything, because after all, the sublime or the ineffable can't be described, only the image. You can find the images and hopefully find those energies behind. Gnostics, Sophia was what they would call, she was the wisdom in God. And her story is found in the Old Testament. There's certain parts in the Old Testament that talks about how this being called wisdom is down here with humans, lost with other humans, and she's trying to help humans get back to God. The Gnostics saw these stories in the a lot of value in the Old Testament. Even though they rejected the God of the Old Testament as evil, they did find a lot of value. And Sophia, in a lot of their myths, is the wisdom of God that somehow falls from grace. In many of the stories, and her story has parallels to the story of Inanna, the story of Persephone. Basically, the story of Sophia and these female goddesses is a story of the soul falling into matter. So Sophia was this character who would fall into matter, and in some stories, she gave birth to God, to the creator God. She had an abortion, and this became God, and then God created Earth. In some stories, she simply creates God, or God comes out of her emotions as she falls from this place called the pleroma, which the Gnostics, to them, it was kind of like heaven. It was, the pleroma meant the fullness of the all. And she would fall down from then, and she would fall into, and sort of the grand narrative would happen with Sophia trying to fight her son, or trying to fight other gods, in order to help us, restore us to, again, our home beyond the stars. And in some stories, again, I talk about Jesus, Mary Magdalene. Sophia is the Gnostic revealer. For your listeners, I always tell people, just look at The Matrix. The Matrix, not only is our most probably famous modern myth that we have, but it is truly a complete Gnostic myth. Morpheus is the Gnostic revealer. Neo is ourselves, or the Christ figure, because the Gnostic said, we could become Christ while alive. And of course, Agent Smith and the architect would be the archons and the demiurge, the creator gods that created this sort of imperfect universe. And this, of course, always went like a lead balloon to most people, because most people could not, and throughout history even now, cannot fathom the reality that we exist in a prison, and that it is sort of a mumbling bureaucrat and often horny God that created this world and created humans. It's very hard for people to accept that. And it's also very hard for people to accept the Gnostic attitude, which was sort of a very intense distrust, a sense of paranoia, a sense of alienation. But with that, there's also a complete sense of fierce curiosity and fierce wonder, and a really yearning to find a home that we once belonged to but are no longer there. And the funny thing is, this idea, the Gnostic attitude, is really, I think, and others have noticed, is probably the best kind of attitude we have today. Because if you've noticed, Amber, or your listeners have noticed, this sort of attitude really works. I mean, paranoia, distrust, a rejection of every institution, of every system of this planet is becoming more and more vogue with the rise of the internet and social media, because all of us are sort of realizing that everything we've been told is a lie. Everything we are is pretty much a lie. And all the things that we used to trust, our religious institutions, our governmental institutions, they're pretty much faulty. They have a lot of cracks. And they're not exactly the best place for us to find ourselves. And that's the kind of attitude the Gnostics had 2,000 years ago, and the world is sort of catching up to it.
Yeah, that's I can definitely see that. And as far as how you were describing Sophia and the whole fallen aspect, but not being evil, it really reminds me of like a Lucifer Morningstar character, like sort of a Miltonian take on, if she would be that sort of Milton Lucifer anti-hero type figure.
No, I think you've hit it right on the head. The sort of modern occult idea of Lucifer as the fallen light bringer, who in a way is awakening up, probably happened before the Gnostics. You can look at the story of Prometheus. He's a Lucifer character, a light bringer. Jesus is really a light bringer. He's also been associated with the morning star, just as Lucifer is. But before Lucifer, and even modern Luciferianism came in, which talks about how we have an inner light, and our greatest gift is to create better than the gods, create better than the creator gods, so that we can have a full mind and a full contribution to the world. The Gnostics were talking about that with Sophia, who, as you said, is again a Lucifer character. And all of this really ties into the idea of the soul falling into the world. And of course, that happens. Plato talks about that, and the ancients talked about it. We were pre-existing. We split off from the great consciousness, wherever it is. We became fragmented, and we became, and now we got to get back home. And the Gnostics had they drew very hard lines in the sand. People called them, world haters and body haters and all that. And that's not necessarily true, because I would say they were reality distrusters. They were reality rejectors, because when you read them historically, the Gnostics always took on the clothing of their times. During Christian times, if they lived in the cities like Rome, they looked like Romans and they hung out with pagans. If they lived in Egypt, they had rituals, probably did sex magic. If they lived outside in the country, they probably dressed up like shepherds and they lived in caves. They always took, and that's why they were scary, because people thought there was some sort of a parasite religion, even though it was more of an attitude what they had. And throughout history, again, they take on the clothing of their society. They don't run to caves or sit in warehouses like emos or anything like that. But it's that Gnostic attitude that's very intense, because in the face kind of go like, yeah, well, it's bad. Oh, we'll make the best of it. Oh, maybe there's a plan with God and all that. The Gnostic attitude has always been like, you ain't going to do anything until you finally accept how bad things are. And that's whether in your personal life, work life, spiritual life. I mean, until you realize that the whole world the whole universe is one big alcoholic, you're not going to be able to help it.
So basically, they were the kind of the original skeptics.
Exactly. And that's what I said. Yeah. When you read their text, they are very skeptical. They distrust everything, and they want to analyze everything. They came from the Platonic universities. They were very versed in philosophy, so they wanted to study. At the same time, they weren't as accepting of the systems like the Neoplatonists and the early Christians. They felt that things needed to be dismantled. You read some of the texts in the universities, the Gnostics are complaining in the 3rd century about social injustices and the corruption of the Roman Empire. And philosophers like Plotinus is like, hey, if you don't like it, let the door hit you on your ass on the way out. This is the way the empire is part of a divine plan. And this sort of attitude happens throughout history. And unfortunately, they get crushed in the end. And again, I see this Gnostic attitude as extremely relevant. One of the great Gnostics of our time is Philip K. Dick. And most people know Philip K. Dick from Minority Report and Blade Runner and other things. He was very influenced by Gnosticism. In fact, in his books, like his exegesis that came out, he confesses that he has found gnosis. He's taken the red pill and there's no turning back. Carl Jung. And as we see, a lot of Philip K. Dick's warnings about surveillance society and all that are come true. In fact, the Gnostics would be the first one who really said the whole universe is one big surveillance society, surveillance system, and we need to do something about it.
So the Gnostics, even today, like everything that you're saying to mainstream Christianity would be very occultic and very how do mainstream Christians treat Gnostics if they're even aware that you guys exist? How do they treat you?
Very well. I get along. I have friendships with the priests and Baptist ministers and so forth. But you might say on a philosophical level, that's a problem. What I see is most people really don't understand the Gnostics or what they're about, because we really never had a picture of the Gnostics until the Nag Hammadi library was discovered in 1945, and the first English translation wasn't brought out till 1979. So before that, all we had was the polemics of the church fathers and a few scriptures. We had what the enemy said about them, that they were doing this and that. And a lot of times they were right. That's what's so amazing about the Nag Hammadi library that was discovered in Egypt, containing a group of, I forgot how many, dozens of texts, is that some of these church fathers in the 2nd century are quoting these texts. And lo and behold, 2,000 years later, hey, there was a Gospel of Judas, there was a Gospel of Thomas, but they were still sort of not giving us the whole picture. So a lot of people still have some strange conceptions of the Gnostics. They tend, because there's so many gaps in history, they mix Gnosticism with thelema, or they mix Gnosticism with other types of occultism. And you get a bit of a warped sense of it. What always drives me nuts is that there was a scholar named Eric Voegelin, and he came out with this blueprint several generations ago, talking about the idea that the Gnostics were here to conquer the world, that what was his attitude? That because we were not in heaven, we were going to bring God down to heaven and become gods. And the Gnostic attitude has never been, we're going to become God and rule the world. Is no, we're going to become God so we can defeat the gods and go beyond the gods. And so there's a lot of mischaracterizations that I see with the Gnostics on all sides, and those are hard to deal with. But it is what it is. I guess that's my job in a way, and it's not easy because Gnosticism can get very complicated, especially when you read their texts. When you read the Nag Hammadi library, as one author in the New York Times said, it's like a gaggle of mystics and madmen and theologians just creating these weird psychedelic stories. I mean, it's like every story looks something out of a science fiction opera, people traveling through places of light and seeing these reptilian monsters and Jesus changing shapes and all this other thing. But there is one theme you can find in the Nag Hammadi Library and the Gnostic Gospels. They're all whispering at you at the same time, one single thing: know thyself, know thyself. If you truly take that voyage inward, which most of you, some horrible thing, you're going to find your own archons and demiurge inside of you. But at one point, you will find that perfect mind, that perfect peace, that perfect consciousness. So that really is the great theme of the Gnostics: know thyself, know thyself.
Yeah. And that seems to be
just
a
going to kick your ass.
Yeah, it seems to be an adage, a motif across time, that's what all the sages say.
Mm-hmm.
But what is the deal? Okay, one thing, I've heard two things when I was studying Gnosticism back in the day. One is that the creation story is a little bit different. It involves Zoe, who comes to wake up Adam, and Zoe's name means life. And then there's also the whole, I've heard this too on Gnostic websites, like Jesus shed his skins. And what's the whole reptilian connection? Because I like the whole, like, I don't know what to call it, starseed. I like the whole sci-fi aspect. I do. Gnosticism is something that I think is really cool. Of course, I don't have a belief in anything specific, but I always thought it was very unique and very well presented in a way that really Christianity mainstream, like when you talk about the Bible, whatever version it is, just doesn't do it. And so it really, I think for people who are like me that really like a good story and a lot of figurative language and philosophy and stuff like that. But what is it about the reptilians and what is it about the creation story? All these differences that kind of turn the regular Christian thing on its head.
Right. The Gnostics had a penchant for deconstruction. They felt that if they could go back, and again, this is through visionary flights, this is through contemplation, meditation, they could have these exercises where they could go back and rewrite the Old Testament, that they would find insights and open up different doorways of archetypes and symbols that would help their own. It was like a form of therapy, if you would. Mm-hmm. So they would go back, and of course they felt that the Old Testament itself had been a lie. They were going to find different things. They were going to rewrite it. Again, it was like a form of therapy, like us going back to the past, except it was in sort of this dream world or dream attitude. Like, they revered, in a lot of their texts, they saw the serpent as an aspect of either Jesus or Sophia. The serpent in ancient times was a symbol of wisdom. They saw Eve as really superior to Adam. She was also an avatar of Sophia, and that's not too far off, because when you read some of the ancient Cimmerian texts, the creator, the first woman, is always superior to the man. She is the wisdom. She is the power from heavens. So they began to do this deconstruction thing in order to, again, figure things out. And it may seem strange to people. In fact, some of the church fathers, like Irenaeus, he complained, like, oh, these Gnostics, they're pumping out gospels every day like some sort of factory. But it's really not that strange. I mean, think about today, what do we do with our gods? Who are our gods today? Comic books, right? Comic book heroes really move us. Comic books is really the only place that as a society, we really do come together. Sports no longer. Obviously, politics is a horrible place for humans to come together. Our schools, our universities, our jobs. But comic books, they are sort of our gods today. They're not real, but they really do inspire us. And what do we do with our superheroes? We reboot them. A writer will come, Chris Nolan, I'm going to write my gospel of Batman. And then what's his name, Zack Snyder, I'm going to rewrite my gospel of Batman and Superman. And in the future, people might be opening these DVDs or whatever and going, what is with these humans in the 21st century and their different versions of Batman? But each one of us think about these versions of Batman. Some of us learn about the campy Batman, about the darker Batman, about the Batman versus Superman. So we love these reboots. And the comic book heroes are, in a way, our gods. They are representation of gods in different ways. So the Gnostics were simply doing that. They were really writing their fan fiction. I don't know if you write, but writing really is one of the great ways to unleash your spirit, to really open up the channels of communication inside, and to find out who you really are by creating these imaginary worlds. So I think that's what the Gnostics were doing, and they were really avant-garde. They were really way behind any times in what they were doing. Just people missed the boat of what they were doing.
Yeah. And, it's interesting, but it's still like the whole like reptilian it's just, so that was just the imagery of the snake, basically. They were just going on that from mythology.
Yes, there is a movement, you call him by a researcher called John Lamb Lash. And he has interpreted the Nag Hammadi library text. And again, I guess he's doing what the Gnostics doing. He's going to reinterpret the way he feels like it, right? Mm-hmm. He's convinced that these archons, which is actually a word for Greek for prince. It just sounds really romantic, right? Archons, like a villain in a movie. But these sort of godly beings who are represented in animal form, some reptilian, which is fine, because when the ancients used to describe a supernatural being, they gave it animal because that's how he really looked. But each feature represented something. A lion head, like they would represent the demiurge as having a lion head, meant that he was fierce. And he had a dragon body, meaning that he was evil. But he has taken it literally, and many people have taken it literally, thinking that the archons are actually our sort of lizard overlords, that they're alien beings who have come down and have been ruled since the time of humans. So they look at the Gnostic text and they find all these clues about archons and ancient astronauts and all that. And it's a very literal interpretation. But at the end of the day, I think the point is that no matter who you are, what you believe in, you are being oppressed by someone. Usually it's you who's doing most of the oppressing, but there are forces in this society that are oppressing you. And I don't think we live anymore in an era where ignorance is bliss, because of the amount of information we're showered with every day, bombarded with. Ignorance is no longer bliss. You can't just hide somewhere and things will be okay. We are being hit at every moment. And it's kind of like you either are going to have to do something with all this information you're being bombarded, or you're going to slowly fragment into chaos and into insanity. The Gnostic attitude of sort of pushing back with skepticism, pushing back with a strong sense of paranoia, pushing back with wonder, and pushing back with a sense that I am going to fight and I am going to find a way out of this mess, I think really works. I think we don't have a choice anymore but to embrace this type of attitude. Be Neo. We have to be Neo.
Yeah, that's a good reference to the whole Matrix is definitely very Gnostic.
Right, and there are other movies that, for your listeners, if they're going like, what the hell is this crazy guy? I'm going to take off my mask and I'm a lizard. He's just babbling away. Movies like Snowpiercer, the Lego Movie is another movie that has very strong Gnostic themes. The Truman Show, Herman Melville. There is evidence that he was influenced by Gnosticism, and Moby Dick is simply an allegory for the demiurge, the god of this world. So Carl Jung was influenced by Gnosticism, and there's a lot of William Blake. So there's a lot of in art. There's a lot of you can really sense the Gnostic thrust because it really works very well. I think it was Stephen Heller, the theologian, who said every artist is already half a Gnostic, because artists always come from a place of alienation, a place of distrust, a place of skepticism, but artists always want to find the truth behind the truth, or as the Gnostics call it. They want to find the reality behind the reality by crafting stories better than the creator gods.
And I would say artists are also free spirits, either free spirits or black sheep.
They've sensed there's a divine spark and there are powers. There are the agent smiths who are always trying to suffuse it, because in the Gnostic myths, when Sophia falls, and the divine, we become human, we have the divine spark. They need that spark to either hoard it or to feed off of it, just like the Matrix needed humans, the human brain, to exist. So again, artists have that sensitivity to sort of see, you know, that's how the world really is. There is somebody who's taking advantage of me, somebody who's taking my money, my life, my age, my creativity, my individuality, and just smothering it or devouring it.
So you mentioned archons, and I remember a couple years ago when we exchanged emails. And it's been a while, but back then I was actively practicing witchcraft, and so, and of course I'd been doing that since the age of 15. So that's where my background mainly is, in the occult and everything. But I asked you about angels. I asked you a lot about the angels, and I think that you said they were. How are angels related to the archons, and what do you make of the goetic spirits? And for those of you who don't know what goetic spirits are, I guess you can explain that to them too, Miguel.
Oh, gee. I don't know if it's been a few years. I think when we last talked, I was sort of delving into it when I was sort of lost because of things happened to life. Let me see how I can tie it in. Well, the word means messenger. And the angels were traditionally simply the messengers of the gods. So you could say Hermes is a messenger. It's interesting that Hermes, the god of the mind, is a trickster god. That tells you how much to trust your own mind. But anyway, he said angels were the messenger of gods. And originally, the angels were just simply neutral beings. They were, again, emanation, hypostasis of the ruling god of this world, and they did his bidding. For example, Satan obviously started out as God's prosecutor. Gnostic text, he's called the firstborn. He's the first actually created in this universe. In some of the texts, of course, their myths change, and the angels were neutral. And they simply manage the universe. You find that in apocryphal Jewish texts. You find it in rabbinic lore and so forth. The Gnostics were the ones who said, probably with Simon Magus, who's considered the first Gnostic and the father of all heresies. We can get into that if you want. But he said, no, these angels have their own agenda. These angels are actually botching up the universe. They've been given the keys to the world, and they've ruined it. The Gnostics eventually, throughout time, said, no, it's not the angels, it's God himself who's gone crazy. And that's a great Gnostic motif that Stephen Davis said, was that the story of the Gnostics is simple. God went crazy and became us. Now it's time for the therapy. But angels have never been seen as benign creatures. That's sort of a construct, and Gnostics really helped develop it, because around in the 2nd century there was a Gnostic called Valentinus who really came up with the concept of the guardian angel, but that was based more on the daemon, the Greek daemon, and the Roman genius, that we all have a higher counterpart that assists us in this world. He simply terms. I mean, like Socrates always said, he had a daemon. That's why Socrates he could predict the weather. He could go into mystic trance at will. He said his daemon was the one helping him out. Valentinus in the 2nd century said, oh, we'll call it, instead of a daemon, we'll call it an angel, because that's the kind of mythology our congregation knows. So angels themselves have become popularized in our modern times, but the Gnostics would say, don't trust them.
And a daemon, spelt very similarly to a demon, is not the same thing.
No, that's just that's a Christian polemic. The word daemon or demon comes from the Greek for helper. That's what he is. He's your little helper, your conscience, again, your higher self, that little voice that tells you this is how it's going to work. And in some stories, when you die, you simply are absorbed back to your daemon, and then there's some sort of karmic mission that you have to do. Later on, Christians, of course, decided that they were going to change the word just simply to vilify pagans. In the whole when they were orchestrating the downfall of paganism, they had to make everything bad. Pan, the great god of the all, had to be turned into something evil, and the goat became evil, and so forth. So, that's just part of the whole thing.
So where in your studies and your convictions, where do goetic spirits fit in? Because goetic spirits are, I guess, what would be considered maybe traditionally, well, not maybe traditionally, more when we say demon, we think of demons, but goetic spirits as in, goetic witchcraft, fallen angels.
Yeah, I don't know if I really have a stance with that, because again, there's in the Gnostic Gospel of Philip, there's a passage that says, "Truth did not come into the world; it came in types and images. The world will not only accept the truth in type of images; you have to enter through the image to get into the truth." So the clothing of these different entities varies from culture to culture. It varies from civilization to civilization. For all we know, instead of gods or whatever, we'll talk about alien beings, reptilian monsters. The image is the same as the energies behind them that haven't changed. So how you want to deal with these negative or positive energies is fine. I mean, in my experience, and I've tried ceremonial magic, sort of blew up in my face because I forgot this thing that everything has a price. But one little thing, I wanted too much. I tried to deal with more transcendental powers. In other words, I tried to look things that will bring me wisdom and grace instead of trying to mess around with forces of the universe.
I don't know. I don't know if all goetic witchcraft is that. From my experience, I don't think that's. I think it's one of those things where it's a tool and you use it how you will. I've never had negative experiences, but then again, I'm currently not practicing, as you well know. But I've never had any sort of. In fact, I always thought that, and I remember talking to one of my good friends from college. She's very Christian. She's an independent Christian, and I spooked her out one time because she came from a Protestant background where they didn't learn a lot of the mythological stuff behind angels and the orders and powers and all that.
Right.
And so I was telling her about all that. And I said, well, the only difference really, if you follow that whole Christian mythology, is that the only difference between angels and demons would be their alignment, to good or bad.
Right.
And that just freaked her out. She's like, no, stop. That's so creepy. That's so creepy that they're the same beings. Because she in her mind, she wanted to think about angels having the white wings and, demons having bat wings. She was doing the very visual, like very literal. Like,
she has the image. She's in her mythology, but it's kind of, like you said, there are parallels from culture to culture and time to time. We can call them what we call them, and we see what we want to see. And of course, like your friend, all of us are programmed within our own time. We're programmed within our culture and our own prejudices. And that's the Gnostic attitudes. Yeah, you are so programmed, you don't even know how bad you have it.
So so let just so I can clarify, you literally believe in, like, there are entities out there. Like, it's just not all metaphor. Like, there's actually something out there in the stars or beyond the stars, like a force.
I would have to say so. I mean, I try. I don't try to talk about too much because, again, these things shift as soon as you try to put your finger on it. It's the whole Hindu neti. As soon as you come up with a formula, you're going to be trapped in your own labyrinth, in your own world, in your own system. So I try to keep things as fluid as possible. But I would say there are definitely forces out there. As far as how much they are really me or how much they are not, that remains to be seen. I mean, the Hermetics, for example, had an attitude that not only do we live in the universe, but the universe lives within us. It's kind of a symbiotic thing. We are the universe, and we are trapped in the universe. It's very nuanced, especially when you start reading Giordano Bruno or some of the other Hermetics. So it's very hard to simply say, yes, there's good and evil, but you'd probably say there is evil, there is good, but it's pretty complicated.
Yeah, I've always thought of it as being, I don't know, like there's an entire spectrum. I think of
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
Um,
it's
what about on your God Above God, your Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio? You talk about you have lots of different guests on. You kind of just cover everything. What sort of just because I know a lot of the viewers, they're atheists or they're humanists, and or they're watching from other sources. So if they go to your channel Aeon Byte, what are they going to find? Like, just give them an overview of the things that you talk about, just not Gnosticism.
well, since I talk about Gnosticism, I also enjoy spreading the topics. Again, it's a podcast that's been going on almost 10 years. There's been a book about Gnosticism. The sequel hopefully will come out at the end of this year. So we talk about Gnosticism, we talk about alternative Christianity and some of the theories on how Christianity began. Since we talk about that, we talk about the parallels or their cousins, because the Gnostics certainly, as many scholars have seen and thinkers, had a lot of cousins throughout history. For example, the Neoplatonists, the Gnostics and the Neoplatonists had a lot of similarities. The Gnostics, the Manichaeans, the Mandeans, the Yazidi, the Sufis, many have connected the Gnostics to the Sufis. And of course, then it becomes more or less of a tangled web. Then we start touching on the Knights Templar. Where the Knights Templar influenced by the Gnostics? They did have the seal of Abraxas, which was this sort of being that the Gnostics revered or either hated, depending on what city, on what kind of sect they were. This sort of supreme God above God, where I get the name of the show. And then it goes, you start touching on the Hermetics, then you start going, and then you can go further in time with the Renaissance magicians, again, Giordano Bruno. Then you can start going even further to the Freemasons. How were the Freemasons influenced by the Gnostics? How were some of the great thinkers like, again, we touched upon Herman Melville, William Blake, God, there's so many, but it becomes this sort of tree. You've got the Gnostics, and you start this tree of gnosis spreading out throughout history. So there becomes a lot of good talk with. And of course, modern occultism is influenced by Gnosticism. You got Crowley and his Gnostic Mass. You've got the Golden Dawn. They're influenced. They were influenced by the Hermetics. You've got alchemy. The Kabbalah has been considered a Jewish form of Gnosticism. Certain of its schools of thought, and it continues. So there is very much a wealth of information. And I don't exactly tie it all in, but I certainly give the viewers this vast landscape that many of them probably didn't even know existed before.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's interesting because you're the only channel, radio, whatever you want to call it, podcast out there that's really pulling all this together, which is one thing I noticed when I found you years ago, is that you really you've even had like Winter Lake on, and some people who are in the
Luciferium is so tied to Gnosticism. It's almost like a modern reboot of Gnosticism. And the principles are very, very similar. It seems to be the secular cousin of Gnosticism.
That's interesting. So, and when you're sitting here talking about like the Knights Templar and all that, I know that there people are in their minds are going to go to the Da Vinci Code, and they're so how relevant is that? Because they always parallel that to Gnosticism, some sources, and also the Cathars. Can you explain how the Cathars? Yeah,
I would say don't go to the Da Vinci Code. It's again what we talked about, mischaracterizing and misinformation. The Da Vinci Code is a perfect example. Almost everything about it is off the mark, from Jesus and Mary Magdalene being married to Constantine creating Christianity. I mean, over and over. And of course, he does touch upon the Cathars. Now, we really don't know that much about the Cathars. Historians can sort of put a connection with and how how you could tie him into the ancient Gnostics. And the Cathars certainly had some doctrine that sounded very Gnostic, like they believed that the world was ruled by Satan, which, I mean, it does say that in the Gospel of Mark. Satan does tell Jesus, I rule the whole world. And Paul, who the Gnostics found inspiration, does say the God of this world, the rulers of this world, or this Aeon. So, but the Cathars certainly took it more to heart and said, yes, Satan is ruling this world. There is a higher God. And they saw Mary as an inspiration, as basically the representation of the divine feminine. They had many of the ideas of the Gnostics, like reincarnation, vegetarianism, and so forth. And they, according to their detractors, we don't have much of their writings. They only read the Gospel of John and rejected the Old Testament. And the Gospel of John, when you start reading it with new eyes, and you do a little history, it was first revered, or we have the first writings on it about, revering it from the Gnostics. And a lot of the themes in the Gospel of John are very Gnostic. Jesus seems to be an alien in this world who's going to join his Father. And the idea is he seems to be wanting to wake up those around him. So the Cathars they're a very interesting case and simply part of that tree of gnosis I've been discussing. So a fascinating group, but again, they came out with this very hard message. They were beloved by the people, and as always, the ruling powers had to snuff them out. Same as it ever was.
Yeah, that's how it goes. Listening to you speak, it reminds me a lot. For some reason, I'm drawing this parallel to the Arthurian legends of Great Britain and also Gaul, the King Arthur myths. So what I can see a little bit of what you're saying in that. Have you ever thought about doing a sort of show on or podcast on King Arthur? And well, not so much just that figure, but Camelot, the whole Camelot mythology and where that comes from. There's, the actual characters in history, supposedly in the histories, and Morgan Le Fay and the mythology around Tintagel. It seems like that's a lot of, I don't know. It's just for some reason, and I did present a paper when I was in graduate school. I presented a paper on Morgan Le Fay and her sort of archetypal symbolism and how it's relevant for the times and how she's sort of an anti-hero. And I think I was looking at her from potentially a post-feminist world, which we don't have. But if we were in a post-feminist world where, all this, and so I was doing a lot of things with Morgan Le Fay, and I was also looking at the Arthurian legends as sort of a mystery, like some sort of, because there's a lot of ties to like early Celtic Chaldee Christianity, but also, of course, pagan. They're very, very pagan. And it's that clash of what Mary Zimmer Bradley, or the author who wrote
the Myths of Avalon.
Sorry, I think it's Marian. The Myths of Avalon, where she's talking about the clash between Christianity and paganism. And everything you're talking about, for some reason, is I don't know. I think there may, and I'm not an expert on Gnosticism. I'm just listening to you talk about it. But it seems like that there's a lot there that you could dig out too, and says as a form of gnosis. You're 100%. You're 100% right. It's just something I haven't gone. I have friends who are clergy in Gnostic churches, independent churches. And that they, like you, they've seen the parallels and they rave about them. For some reason, it's goes into one ear and one out. Probably because I'm such a fan of Gorman's Excalibur. I almost don't want to ruin with my own personal take. So even though there was a big scholar from Wake Forest University, Eric Wilson, wrote a book called Gnostic Cinema. And he has a very good chapter. It talks about how Excalibur is the ultimate tale of alchemy. You've got the Negroido, you've got the transformation, and he breaks it all down into very occult themes. And in a way, and I can see how it resonates, because after Jesus, when the Christian era started, there was a lot of romance already being put out about Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Yeah. And it came through medieval times. You had some very interesting stories. There is one, I mean, this is going to blow your mind. There's a early text, and I think it's Gnostic. It's called The Question of Mary. And basically what happens is that Jesus resurrects, and he tells Mary, come here.
And Mary's like, oh, yeah, my God, my Lord. Takes him up to the mountain. Jesus takes Mary Magdalene up to the mountain and suddenly pulls out from his rib a woman and starts having sex in front of Mary Magdalene. And she starts crying. So, of course, you might be going, well, that's horrible. What a jerk. But when you look at it symbolically, a new Eve, the alchemical transformation of the male and female powers, represented in forth of an earthly being, that so she will wake up, it makes a little bit more sense. And I guess we're in the theme of alchemy, but that was sort of the theme that you see in the Gnostic texts, that Jesus and Mary Magdalene are the earthly representations of there's in some of the texts a cosmic Christ and Sophia, and they've been split apart, and what they do below can somehow heal what is above, or at least bring the energies from above down. So in Arthur, there's obviously the same ideas, the king and the queen that must reunite, and the harrowing experience that they must go through, which each character, the knights and the grail and so forth. So you can make a very good case for that.
Yeah, and I guess my interest was always the character of Morgan Le Fay, because in some of the original, like Le Mort d'Arthur and some of the earlier stuff, she was never a villain. She was not. She became demonized as centuries went on. So she was not the villain. And
like Mary Magdalene became demonized.
Yes, she's very much a Mary Magdalene, a weird blend of a Mary Magdalene Luciferian figure. And it's really interesting. And also, there's a lot of literature about this, a lot of sort of pagan-esque things out there. She's also considered an aspect of the triple goddess, the Morgan, like a human, you can almost say like this is sounding weird, but like a female version of like Christ or something. The equivalent of that to the Morgan. Right. So that was always really interesting to me, the whole mythology there and interconnectedness.
Yeah, for some reason you remind me of the goddess Hecate, and I think the Gnostics had these Hecate, they send her, but what she represents reminds me a lot of the Abraxas character, or the Abraxas god, or Dionysus, these gods of these gods whose sole purpose is to break all boundaries and to go beyond the limitless. So gods that kind of encompass everything, but free us from everything, free us from time, free us from space, free us from ourselves. So someone like Hecate, Dionysus, Abraxas, even Baphomet. I think I like this writer who called him, I think was it Edward Pandemonium? No, it was a chaos magician. I forgot his name, but he called them unfinished gods, because these are the gods that you and I are making right now, and we don't ever have to create them fully. They're always being made as time goes by, as our consciousness evolves. So anyway, interesting side note.
Yeah, and he has a lot of that stuff on his channel under Divine Feminine, if anyone out there wants to check that out. You've had a lot of interesting people on. You've had Elaine, how do you say her name, Pagels?
Oh, Elaine Pagels, yes, who wrote the great bestseller, The Gnostic Gospels, decades ago, and pretty much brought the whole idea of Gnosticism to the forefront, and showed how the Gnostics were very advanced, and they were subversive, but also they were subversive because of their ability to make women more equal, their ability to revere the divine feminine, how they made Mary Magdalene a leader in fact, they made Mary Magdalene the smartest person always with the whole group. She was, as one Gnostic text, Dialogue of the Saviors, calls Mary Magdalene the woman who understood the all. She's the only person in history who got the plurum, who got the message of the alien God, who, she's the only one who can stand next to Jesus, and of course, again, their union is the same union as the cosmic Christ and Sophia up beyond the stars. So, I've been blessed with a lot of phenomenal guests, academics, mystics, theologians. I've had Hollywood directors, just a great group that have honored the show, and I'm very grateful for it. It's niche. I mean, I'm never going to be coast to coast or anything like that, but it fills a purpose, and I guess that's my kesmet, my sacred quest or whatever.
And tell us about your books, your writings, and all your publications, because I know that you have some books, some fiction books as well.
Yes, I
Sci-fi.
have.
Science fiction.
I was published under Warner Books many years ago. It was called The Queen of Darkness, and I've published it myself once it was out of contract, and I renamed it Stargazer. And it's basically it came out a long time ago. It's sort of that vampire in space where the vampires take over the world and create this futuristic dystopia in the wastelands of a destroyed culture, of destroyed society. And the vampires sort of forget that they were humans, and they assume that they're on top of the food chain, separate, that they are gods, except for one vampire who suddenly rebels. So in a way, it's Gnostic because he has to wake up. It's interesting because, in most of the world, we think, I would like to be a god, but this vampire says, no, to save myself, I need to become more human. So, and then there's a sequel, which is called Heretic, and it continues the saga of these vampire and human war, but kind of goes throughout history how it happens. And there's one vampire who, I call him the centurion, who when Jesus is being crucified, he goes under the cross and takes a couple of drops and becomes God himself, and this sort of supreme character comes out into the fray when the vampires are ruled by Lilith, who's the famed demoness in Kabbalah, who I made the head vampire, and so have other authors. I did it in the late 90s. I also have a more or less traditional sword and sorcery called Executioner's Daughter. But I don't know if they're going to put a second edition. I might have to republish that myself. So, and then of course I have Voices of Gnosticism, which is transcripts of many of my interviews that include Elaine Pagels and others, many of them the very translators of the Nag Hammadi library. And it's in transcript forms. You can read their interviews, and I give, of course, my own writings to sort of balance them out. So yeah, those are my books. And again, they're all niche. I'm not quitting my day job over anything, but I think I'm proud of what I've done. Again, yeah. I hope I've hopefully entertained and woken up one person. Hopefully I've been the Gnostic revealer, the Morpheus to one person out there who can sort of wake up to his creative power, his power of inventing, the fire from the gods. So the story is very ancient, actually.
But the interesting thing about your whole take on your vampires in space is it's almost like it, if you think of like psychic vampires, like something out there, like woohoo, like psychic vampires, that kind of like is almost like a metaphor for demons and angels and the whole God thing that we have going on anyway, because the whole vampire mythology has been with us for centuries.
Yeah, that's been going on in so many cultures. I mean, the Greeks had them, the Hebrews had them, there was the Japanese had them, and they called them the kappa. And these vampires weren't nice because they would actually suck your blood through your anus. I mean, what a way to die. Yeah, it's not very romantic, like being having a handsome guy kiss you on the neck or something. This is a bit different. So yeah, the metaphors are there. I mean, I've always thought vampires they're various things. It's our attraction to the night, to the darkness, a metaphorical realization that we're all feeding off each other, that we're our own little archons. It's a fear of disease because the vampires sort of came from the grave and so forth. So these are powerful archetypes that continue to be rebooted, like our comic book heroes, like our gods, like everything else. It's fun stuff.
So what do you think about there's a whole dialogue that's been going on through the centuries about science and religion, or the tangible and the intangible. And I've always just figured, and a lot of other secular people would disagree with me, but I just think what's fantastical and what's fantasy is just what we haven't explained or discovered yet. So that whole divorce that happened in the Enlightenment between science, and it had to, for progress, it had to happen. But I've always thought, what all the future technology that is to come, it's magic today, but tomorrow it will just be technology.
Right. Oh, yes, the old Arthur C. Clarke thing. Any advanced technology would appear as magic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, I think you hit it very well in the Enlightenment. It seems when Descartes and Newton came, which is kind of odd because both were like raving mystics. I mean, Newton was an alchemist and Descartes, all his ideas of the mechanical universe, he had them in dreams. It's so ironic. But what happened is we used to be left and right brain. We had an intuitive side and a logical side, and they worked together. Once it happened with Newton and Descartes and other things, our left brain sort of took over. And it made sense because left brain thinking gets results. It's practical. It gets you, it gets you the inventions and the medicine and all that, but it's sort of taken over, and we've lost our magical world. We've lost our magical thinking. We don't see into the invisible worlds out there, into, like I said, those truths behind the image, and that's unfortunate, and it's deleterious. And I don't think it has to be that way. Think about it this way: when around the medieval times, Florence got a hold, and this is I recently heard this from Gordon White, but he said it much better than I do, the chaos magician. The people in Florence, the Medicis, got a hold of the remaining texts of Plato and the Hermetic texts, the pagan Gnostic Hermetic texts, and they read these. Within a few years, something changed in the whole Western Europe. It's almost like there was this magical awakening. And in a few centuries, we had the greatest art, the science, the literature, everything just exploded within humanity. It was like this was magic. Something with these philosophical mystic texts really changed human consciousness. And it was the left and right brain thinking working completely together, but in unison and whole. And then, unfortunately, that sort of change a few centuries ago, and then we got the Industrial Revolution, the dark side of the Enlightenment with the French Revolution, and so forth. So it's a pity, and hopefully we can start getting back, at least here in the West and Western Europe.
That's interesting that you brought up the whole intuition and logic or emotion. I've heard it put emotion and logic, and how it
call it what you want. Yeah, the image. Call it what you want.
Yeah. It does take both. In fact, Virginia Woolf said that one has to be an intercourse with both the man and the woman inside of you in order to have a fulfilled
Christ and Mary Magdalene.
Yeah. And even Virginia Woolf said that to be complete, to be balanced, that you have to have a conversation, healthy intercourse with your male and your female. And she was, of course, talking about logic and emotion. But recently, I've seen a lot of things, especially going around and I'm just going to say atheist circles, mainly new atheist circles, which we're not, but where there's this whole debate like logic over emotion. And that's very dangerous when you don't check logic, or even if you don't check emotion with logic, that either or, it's very dangerous.
Yeah, because logic, or the solar aspect, call it what you want, has given us some of these great wars. It rationalizes to get rid of Jews and so forth. So it's a dangerous thing. I mean, it kind of goes back to the famous myth of Plato in the Symposium, that once humans were hermaphrodite. We were both male and female, call it right brain, left brain, cosmic Christ, Mary Magdalene, whatever you want. We weren't fragmented. And the gods felt threatened because humans were so powerful, they had to split us up into two. So this is, I think Plato it was a great allegory on the danger of human beings becoming too split in their sides. And as we can see, the left brain or whatever has sort of ruled this world for the last few centuries. And here we are, entertain us. And
what do we say to arguments like that? I mean, what do you, because I see that a lot. And, one of the reasons I started this channel was to sort of, I'm in Alabama. It's interesting being out as a non-believer in Alabama, whether you call me an atheist or a humanist or whatever the case may be, it doesn't matter. But it's kind of lumped in the same category. But it's interesting because I'm seeing now, and I don't know if you've seen this online, and I know that we travel in a little bit of different circles, but this whole it's not even a dialogue; it's more of just a complete and total just ugliness, where it's anything that's seen as being emotional or being whimsical, and this is coming from the hardcore atheist community. And I'm not talking. It's not coming from physicists. I'm married to a physicist, and I know several of them. There's only about 40,000 in the United States, but it's actually coming from the lay people who are actually not scientists, like the whole pop culture atheism, new atheism. It's called new atheism.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I have a lot of new atheist friends. I hung out at a conference not too long ago. The great contributions. What you reminded about the physicists is what did Niels Bohr tell Albert Einstein when he wasn't budging about the theory of relativity? He said, what did he say? You're not thinking, you're merely being logical. Niels Bohr was using all of his faculty, his intuition, his imagination, his everything to really break through and find some amazing discoveries. And that's the whole point. What is wrong with this magic? What is wrong with imagination? When you look at the ancient Gnostics and the Neoplatonists, part of their main thrust was, as we've talked about in writing their gospels and going through flights, was using your imagination to expand who you were, to expand the world, to find possibilities where there were no possibilities before. That is a concerted effort of all who you are, working to the mind of God, working perfectly together. And it's important. And I'm sorry, but I am a skeptic. I like to research things, and I like to make sure there's a science behind it. And when it's unexplained, I try to keep going at it and at least look at the data. But there is a lot going out there that we know nothing about. There are people who've had experiences, and you can document these experiences, whether you're reading Colin Wilson or Gary Lockman or other of these scholars out there. There are people that have experiences. We cannot explain them. They have seen things that many people have seen, sometimes in groups. You can't call it mass delusion. And there's a lot going out there, and we are it's kind of like the cat behind you that's playing. Your cat does not know the incredible science and world that's going around. It's stuck in its frame of consciousness. We're stuck in our frame of consciousness. It's just completely logical to say that there are other frames of consciousness so much higher than us, that we're the cats in the room right now. As you know, as like a guy was Whitley Strieber, the guy who wrote Communion, was saying, no, aliens aren't embedded with us. We're embedded with them. We're the cats in the room with the aliens walking around at will. So there is a lot out there, and unfortunately, not any of the friends I have, but a lot of people in the skeptical community have just downright lied, misrepresented, suppress a lot of this evidence that is out there that shows us that we live in a very, very large universe, very busy with things that we can't explain right now. Hopefully we will in the future.
Well, and when they do that, and I'm sort of criticizing what I've seen, and I don't consider my community, because I don't consider myself a new atheist or anything like that, but they're not scientists. They're not coming from academia or research like my friends and associates are. They're very know-it-all. They're in complete denial that neuroscience is a growing field, and neuroscience is explaining things that happen in consciousness. And I'm not a neuroscientist, but I appreciate it, and I'm glad it's here. I'm glad that
we look at Sam Harris, one of the bishops of atheism. He says, we know nothing about consciousness. We have absolutely no idea how consciousness works, and we cannot replicate it. It makes no sense that this gray matter in synapses has a sense of can be subjective, or in any sort of being. So consciousness is we can start right there. That's the great unknown as we in our modern time. Maybe it will be solved in the future. Who knows? But right now, it's a mystery.
And see, and just what you said, just the whole quote about Sam Harris, and his acolytes will go out and say something completely bizarre and in denial of.
They want their orthodox. Yeah. They want the same thing the Christians wanted when they wanted to suppress the Gnostics and their imagination and visionary experience. They want a for sure safe thing. They want reality packaged in a very nice way because it's safe, because it brings results, and because it's practical, just like the left mind wants. And that's, people will fight, people will kill for it, people will destroy your reputation for it. I mean, we all want to be safe in our little matrix, and nobody wants to take the red pill because it sucks.
Yeah.
I mean, your life gets turned upside down.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah.
That's sort of been something that I've been wondering about, because, you know, it just this last year, I've never interacted with a lot of non-believers that would actually embrace the term, or embrace the label atheist. So it was really interesting seeing how many different atheists there are out there, but how they behave like different denominations of Christianity. And when they act out like that, and they behave like that, they actually give religious people they validate that, well, atheism is really a religion. Well, atheism is really a religion. When a religious person says that, they've usually seen an atheist act out and act like a know-it-all. And you know, you kind of have to be agnostic about the unknown.
Very well. Yeah, you got to be open-minded, or else how are you going to learn? I mean, there's, again, people want sure things. Who's the guy who wrote Jurassic Park?
And
I'm drawing her back.
Not John Grisham.
No, he's the lawyer guy.
Yeah,
we have it.
Yeah.
Let's look it up here.
Yeah. Oh,
Jurassic
not Patterson. I'm thinking.
There, I'm typing it in. Jurassic Park. Novel. Michael Crichton.
Yeah, Michael Crichton. Okay, yeah.
Right. He was an avowed atheist, and he was always an atheist, and he went out on sort of a walk up out of the world. He went to like just to different islands, the far Asia, and sort of went and did the rituals of other people, explored different places, kind of like what Steve Jobs did before Apple.
Yeah.
And he came back and he said, I have seen things that are basically supernatural. And he was disinvited to like talk at atheist conferences. I forget even which one. So you just got to go out on an adventure. I used to, I've done ghost investigations, and I was somewhat skeptical, and I did them for a long time, and I saw things that are completely unexplained. And I have my theories. I'm putting my ideas, my thesis on them, but I know there's something out there, and I'll make my case when it's time.
Yeah, so. And that's the whole thing with me. It's like, you know, atheist is just a negation. It just means without or lacking the a prefix, and just means without a religion or without a God. You know, you're just. It doesn't mean that when you say I absolutely, completely, and totally disbelieve in this, that's a belief.
Exactly. I mean, my dad was, I would call, he was an atheist. It just meant he was done with religion. He was done with the mythologies of the gods and all that. And he was going to live his life as a person. Later on, after he passed away, I heard from my stepmother that he believed there was some sort of intelligent or spirit beyond this world, but it was his personal belief, and it wasn't going to affect his life or his family or anything like that. That's sort of the classic old atheist. The new atheism is more, as they call it, a scientific materialist. It's almost it's a new form of nihilism, where all we are is just blob of cells or robots without free will. And well, that can lead to a lot of bad rationalization, because if we're just machines, then maybe we need to get rid of the crippled machines. Maybe we need to get rid of the weak machines.
Well,
maybe we need to.
And I saw some of that in here, and I'll tell you when we're off the air, because it kind of made big news. But and one thing that a lot of these new atheists don't understand is that a lot of the scientists, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, will not come out as an atheist because of that behavior. He will use the word agnostic, even though atheist should be fine to use, because it just means without and lacking. And now, you know, it's really scary how, you know, and I wonder, I don't know, just the whole thing about atheism, the whole idea of being without a certain God, or being without a religion, a label, is kind of very Gnostic. It's kind of a very Gnostic path. If you look at just the whole finding a way of knowing or being what you've been talking about, finding your truth.
Right. There was a couple of philosophers who were atheists, the Greeks. I mean, most things come from the Greeks, but the Gnostics, you could say, were atheists because they did reject all the gods. And they just assumed that there was something better beyond the gods. Again, there was the supreme intelligence, an alien entity or alien consciousness that they could find better answers with. So in a way, they were certainly agnostic. They were certainly one of the first atheists, and they definitely toyed with existentialism and even nihilism. In a lot of their texts, it seems everything is lost, but I think the Gnostic thrust, and this was something that Gary Lockman, who's been a guest, he said, the Gnostic attitude was simple. There is no meaning to the universe. We have to give it meaning. Maybe we live in a cold universe, but we can bring meaning as humans, as those the universe is housed within our heads. We can give it meaning with our imagination, with our creativity, with our visionary flights. We can bring a lot of light into this world. It's the whole Luciferian thing of spreading your light until it shines so hard. So I think it's great. And a lot of my atheist friends, I mean, in a way, I don't know if they're atheists because they're just so much into comic books and the heroes of our time. So who knows?
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Do you want to give out all your websites and your Twitter and Facebook and everything so people can find you? I have it in the description too, so everyone look in the description.
Yay. No, I would say just go to thegodabovegod.com. Again, that was actually the theologian Paul Tillich, who, when talking about the Gnostics, who they believed in was this God above God. And some called it a separate God, an alien God. But go to thegodabovegod.com. You'll find information on the podcast, social media, my books, articles, and all that good stuff. Feel free to drop me a line if you have any question. And please support us. I mean, people like you and me, Amber, we are in the alternative media. We are not beholden to the 6 corporations that control all the media in this country. So we are really, in a way, the closest thing to the truth. And as we get drowned by more and more misinformation, like I said, this time they're going to break our minds. They're going to make sure we can't see straight. That gnosis, that special type of knowledge, might be the best thing for our times, and we need it.
That's very well said. And please look at his Amazon bio page, author biography page, and check out his books too. So I want to mention that I have a link to your books in the description.
Oh, wonderful! Thank you. Wonderful.
So cool.
Yes, Voices of Gnosticism, Stargazer, Heretic, and the Executioner's Daughter. So.
Cool beans. Well, thank you so much for giving us your time and for being on. Okay, guys, say goodbye to Miguel Conner, and till next time, guys.
Adios.